I should have known something was off when the Forest Service offered a triple rate. A giant Bigfoot harassed our helicopter crew at a remote airstrip in Oregon. I've been flying helicopters for 22 years, 14,000 hours in the mountains, and nothing prepared me for what happened at Dutton Creek last September. The Forest Service hired us for routine maintenance. Triple rate should have been our first warning. By morning, we found 18-inch footprints circling our helicopter, 5 toes, dermal ridges like fingerprints. The stride measured 52 inches. The second night, something stacked our equipment boxes by weight, heaviest to lightest, while we slept in a sealed trailer 20 meters away. Then the rocks started hitting. Basketball-sized granite chunks spiderwebbing our windscreen from 3 different directions. Whatever was throwing them could calculate trajectory and force. But here's what the Forest Service didn't want us to know: we were the 4th crew to abandon that site. And when their ranger showed up with a folder marked "Personal," full of photos they're not supposed to have, one question changed everything. What happens when you realize the government has been managing these encounters for 40 years, and we were never meant to leave? September 2019 had been a slow month. My Portland hangar lease was coming due, and winterizing a remote airstrip sounded like easy money. 4 days max, they said. Just inspect the fuel depot, check the weather station, clear any growth from the landing zone before the October storms rolled in. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, September 17th. Regional office, very apologetic about the short notice. Dutton Creek Airstrip needed immediate attention. Some decommissioned strip carved into the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest back in the 70s. 47 miles from the nearest paved road, satellite communication only. They'd email the coordinates and have a fuel truck waiting at Baker City Municipal for our departure. I assembled my usual crew that evening. Diana Reeves was my first call, Boeing Certified Systems Specialist, Wilderness EMT, and the only person I trusted to keep medical supplies organized in the middle of nowhere. She'd done 8 years of search and rescue in the Cascades, knew her way around a forest. Jake Morrison, my new co-pilot, had just come off 6 years flying Coast Guard rescues. Kid was eager, maybe too eager, but his thermal imaging credentials were solid. Tom Nakamura rounded out the team, 15 years with Chevron Aviation, could make any fuel system work, even the ancient stuff the Forest Service hadn't touched since Reagan was president. The briefing was straightforward. I spread the sectional charts across my office table, marked the GPS coordinates. We're here. I pointed to the small airstrip symbol barely visible among the elevation lines. Dutton Creek, 6,200 feet elevation. Last maintained visit was, I checked the paperwork, 2017, 2 years without inspection. Why so long? Diana asked, already taking photos of the charts with her phone. She documented everything, a habit that would matter more than any of us knew. Budget cuts, probably. I didn't think much of it then. The Forest Service was always behind on maintenance, especially the remote sites. We'll take the 407, load it with everything we might need. 4 days of supplies, camping gear, extra parts for the weather station. Cell phones won't work out there, but I've got the Garmin satellite communicator. 4-hour response time if we need emergency extraction. Jake studied the approach vectors. Weather? Clear through the weekend. Maybe some rain Sunday night, but we'll be long gone by then. Tom was examining the fuel depot specifications. JP8 storage, 10,000-gallon capacity. Says here the tanks are from 1,974. That's why they're paying triple, I said. Nobody wants to deal with vintage infrastructure that far from. Looking back, there were signs even in the paperwork. The previous maintenance logs, the ones Diana insisted on reviewing, had strange gaps. Crews would arrive, work 1 or 2 days, then leave without explanation. Equipment failures were always blamed on wildlife interference, but they never specified what kind of wildlife. In September 2016, a crew had written, "Unable to complete, conditions unsafe, no elaboration, but we needed the money, and I'd dealt with worse." Afghanistan had taught me to work in hostile environments. How much trouble could a Forest Service airstrip be? We launched from Baker City on September 23rd at 0800 hours. Clear morning, visibility unlimited. The Bell 407 was loaded to capacity tools, camping gear, emergency supplies, enough food for a week, just in case. Diana had added her personal trail cameras to the manifest, said she wanted to document any wildlife for her photography blog. Jake ran through his checks while Tom secured the fuel bladders. 40 minutes of flying over green nothing. Douglas fir and ponderosa pine as far as you could see, broken only by the occasional logging road or fire break. Then Dutton Creek appeared, a gray scar cut into the forest, barely wide enough for a small plane, surrounded by walls of trees that seemed to press in from all sides. I should have trusted my gut when I saw it. Should have circled once and headed home, but triple rate has a way of making you ignore your instincts. We were on the ground by 0900. The airstrip was worse than the photos suggested. I'd expected deterioration. 2 years without maintenance in the Oregon mountains will do that. But this was different. The tarmac wasn't just cracked, it was being reclaimed. Douglas fir saplings, some already 3 feet tall, pushed through the asphalt in perfect lines like they'd been planted. The fuel depot's concrete pad showed a spider web of fractures, the kind you get from significant ground settling or seismic activity, except this area hadn't seen an earthquake in decades. Jesus, Jake muttered, walking the perimeter while I shut down the rotors. Looks like nobody's been here in 10 years, not 2. Diana was already photographing everything, her iPhone clicking steadily. Look at this, she called from near the tree line. She was kneeling beside what should have been a game trail, deer, elk, maybe bear. But the path just stopped, right at the edge of the clearing, as if nothing wanted to enter the airstrip. Probably just grown over, I said. But even I didn't believe it. In 22 years of landing in remote spots, I'd never seen wildlife avoid a clearing so completely. Clearings meant grass, young shoots, easy feeding. Animals loved them. Tom had found the weather station, a tall metal tower with an anemometer and various sensors. Half the equipment was dangling from broken mounts. Looks like something climbed it, he said. Big something based on these bend marks. Bear, I suggested. Black bears climb. Sure, Tom said, but his voice carried doubt. The metal was twisted, not just bent. Whatever had climbed that tower had grip strength that didn't match any bear I knew about. We set up base camp near the helicopter, 2 large tents, one for sleeping, one for communications and equipment. Diana established our medical station while Jake installed motion sensors around the perimeter, standard protocol for overnight stays in bear country. The sensors would alert us to anything larger than a raccoon moving within 50 meters of camp. By afternoon, we'd made decent progress. Tom had begun assessing the fuel depot, finding the pump seized but potentially salvageable. Jake and I walked the runway, marking the saplings that would need removal. Diana had set up her trail cameras at what she called strategic positions, though I noticed she placed them higher than usual, 8, maybe 10 feet up the trees. Expecting tall visitors? I joked. She didn't smile. There's something off about this place, Joseph. Listen. I stopped working and actually listened. That's when I noticed it. No birds. A forest in September should be alive with bird calls. Jays, woodpeckers, chickadees. But Dutton Creek was silent except for the wind in the trees. It's like they're avoiding this place, Diana said quietly. Everything is. That first evening, we sat around our camp stove eating MREs and trying to shake off the unease. Jake had brought a deck of cards, and we played a few hands of poker while the sun dropped behind the western ridge. The temperature plummeted as soon as the light faded. September in the mountains was like that. We'd gone from 60 degrees to near freezing in an hour. At 2,147 hours, I remember checking my watch. The first knock came. It was distant, from the northeast. A hollow wooden sound, like someone hitting a baseball bat against a tree. Deliberate. 3 strikes, evenly spaced. We all froze. Tree settling, I said. Temperature drop makes them crack sometimes. Then came the answer. From the southwest, maybe half a mile away. Same pattern. 3 strikes, same interval. Diana already had her phone out, recording. That's not random, she whispered. They're communicating. They? Jake's voice cracked slightly. More knocks, from the north this time, then east. We were surrounded by whatever was making that sound, each source maintaining position but responding to the others in sequence. Diana timed the intervals, made notes in her phone. The pattern continued for 12 minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Could be hunters, Tom suggested without conviction, signaling each other. At 10 at night, 47 miles from the nearest road, Diana shook her head. And who hunts by knocking on trees? I stood up, grabbed my tactical flashlight, the big mag light that doubled as a club, and swept the beam across the tree line. Nothing. just dark trunks and shadow. Everyone stays in the tents. Tonight, I ordered. Jake, make sure those motion sensors are armed. We'll figure this out in the morning. But lying in my sleeping bag that night, listening to the absolute silence that had returned to the forest, I knew morning would only bring more questions. The knocking hadn't sounded human, but it hadn't sounded like any wildlife I knew either. It had sounded intelligent. Nobody slept well that first night. I could hear the others shifting in their sleeping bags, Jake's nervous clearing of his throat every few minutes, Tom's deliberate, too steady breathing that meant he was wide awake. Around 0300, I gave up pretending and stepped outside to check the perimeter. The motion sensors hadn't triggered. The forest was dead silent, that complete absence of sound that makes your ears ring. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, saw nothing but trunks and shadow, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. 22 years of staying alive in bad places had taught me to trust that feeling. Diana was already up when I returned to the tent, sitting cross-legged with her phone, replaying the audio she'd recorded. "Listen to this," she whispered, holding out an earbud. "I've been analyzing the intervals. The knocking pattern was clearer in the recording. 3 strikes, pause, 4 strikes, longer pause, 2 strikes. Then responses from the other directions, each slightly different but following what seemed like a structured sequence. It's not random," she said, her voice taking on that clinical precision she used when stressed. "The timing is too consistent. And look," she showed me her notes. Each position maintained its unique pattern, like they each had their own signature. "Could be echoes," I suggested weakly. "Echoes don't change direction and respond to each other, Joseph." Tom sat up in his sleeping bag. "I found something earlier," he said quietly. Didn't want to mention it in front of Jake. Kid's spooked enough. He pulled out his phone, showing us photos he'd taken of the weather station's data logger. The small display showed historical readings going back 6 years. "Look at September," he said, scrolling through. "Every single September, the equipment fails. 2014, 2015, 2016, all the way through last year. Always the same notation, wildlife interference." "Bears getting ready for winter," I said. "They get aggressive in fall." Tom gave me a look. "Bears that only damage equipment in September? And only at this specific site?" He scrolled to another screen. "The other Forest Service stations in this area, no problems. Just Dutton Creek. The sun couldn't rise fast enough." When first light finally touched the eastern ridge, I was already outside, walking the perimeter with my coffee. That's when I saw them. Tracks. They were in the soft earth between the helicopter and the tree line, perfectly preserved in the morning dew. My first thought was bear had to be bear, but as I knelt beside them, my brain struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. 5 toes, clear as day, but the proportions were all wrong. The heel was too narrow, the arch too pronounced, and the size. Christ, this size. My boot looked like a child's shoe next to it. "Jake," I called. "Bring a tape measure." Jake came running, then stopped dead when he saw the prints. His nervous laugh sounded almost hysterical. That's not. "Just measure," I said. 18 inches. The track was 18 inches long and 7 inches wide at the ball of the foot. Jake stretched the tape between Prince's 52-inch stride. To put that in perspective, my stride at a normal walk was about 30 inches. Diana arrived with her camera, immediately dropping to her knees beside the clearest print. She took dozens of photos from different angles, using a dollar bill for scale. Her hands were steady, but I could see the excitement or fear in her eyes. "Joseph," she said quietly, "look at this." She zoomed in on one of her photos. The morning light had caught the impression perfectly, showing details I'd missed with the naked eye. Dermal ridges, the tiny lines and whorls you'd see in a fingerprint. And there, clear as anything, a break in the middle of the foot where it had flexed. "That's called a mid-tarsal break," Diana said. "Humans don't have that. Our feet are rigid for efficient walking, but great apes." She trailed off. "No apes in Oregon," Jake said, his voice too high. "No," Diana agreed. "No apes in Oregon." Tom had been following the tracks toward the tree line. "They go all the way around," he called. "Whatever this was, it circled our camp. Multiple times." I stood up, my knees protesting. In Afghanistan, we'd sometimes found Taliban footprints around our forward operating bases. They'd probe our defenses, test response times, look for weaknesses. These tracks gave me the same feeling something intelligent had been evaluating us. Could be a hoax, I said, not believing it myself. Someone trying to scare us off. Diana was already shaking her head. The dermal ridges are perfect. The weight distribution, the way the toes grip the soil, you can't fake that. And who would hike 47 miles into the wilderness to play a prank on a maintenance crew? We spent the rest of that morning trying to focus on our work. Tom started on the fuel pumps, cursing at the seized valves. Jake and I began marking the runway incursions for removal. Diana set up additional cameras, placing them even higher than before, 12 feet up, some of them. But we all kept glancing at the trees, waiting for something to move, waiting for another knock. It was Tom who found the weather station's maintenance log, tucked inside a rusted metal box beneath the equipment shelter. Most entries were routine filter changes, battery replacements, but September 2016 had a different handwriting, shaky and urgent. Third night, they don't like the equipment, threw rocks at the anemometer. Stevens quit, walked out at dawn. I'm leaving too. Whatever's out here, we're in its territory. And below that, in different ink like someone had come back to add it, don't acknowledge the stones. I still think about that warning. Still wonder what would have happened if we'd understood what it meant. The second morning brought worse discoveries. I woke at 0530 to Jake shaking my shoulder, his face pale in the gray pre-dawn light. Joseph, you need to see this. The motion sensors had triggered 14 times between 0217 and 0443. 14 separate events, all around our perimeter. But when Jake checked the cameras, they'd captured nothing, not a frame. How is that possible? I asked, scrolling through empty files on his tablet. The sensors are infrared, triggered by heat and movement, Jake explained, his fingers nervous on the screen. But the cameras, it's like something knew exactly where they were, stayed just outside their range. That should have been our cue to leave, but we had a job to finish, and I was still telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Poachers, maybe. Weird atmospheric conditions. Something. Diana was examining the tracks again, now visible all around our camp in the soft morning earth. She'd been out since first light with her camera and measuring tape, documenting everything with the thoroughness of a crime scene investigator. Joseph, she called. Come look at this. She was kneeling beside a particularly clear set of impressions near the helicopter's tail rotor. The prints here showed something I hadn't noticed yesterday. A clear heel strike and toe-off pattern, what Diana called a compliant gait. This isn't just some animal walking past, she said, pointing to the spacing. Look at the pattern. It stopped here, stood for a while, see how the prints are deeper, then moved to here, stopped again. It was examining the helicopter. Bears are curious, I started, but Diana cut me off. Bears don't walk on two legs for extended periods. And look, she showed me her phone, where she'd been measuring and calculating. Based on the stride length and the depth of impression, I can estimate height and weight. Whatever made these was between 8 and 9 feet tall, minimum. And heavy, maybe 700, 800 pounds. That's impossible, Tom said, joining us. He'd been trying to get the fuel pumps working, but had given up to see what we were discussing. I know it's impossible, Diana said, and for the first time I heard real fear in her voice. But I'm just telling you what the measurements show. We tried to continue working. What else could we do? The helicopter only had enough fuel to get us back to Baker City, and the depot's pumps needed to be operational for the Forest Service's emergency flights. But concentration was impossible. Every crack of a branch, every bird call, which were few, made us freeze and look toward the forest. Around 1,000 hours, Tom made a discovery in the maintenance shed that changed everything. Behind a stack of rusted fuel barrels, he found an old Forest Service logbook, the kind they'd used before everything went digital. The pages were yellowed and mouse-chewed, but readable. Most entries were standard maintenance notes, but September entries, going back years, told a different story. Each one mentioned problems, equipment failures, wildlife disturbances, crews leaving early. Many entries had been redacted with black marker, but Tom found one where the marker had faded. The 15th of September, 2012. Crew abandoned site after 3 nights. Rocks thrown at equipment shed with accuracy suggesting intelligence. Maintain official report of weather damage. Do not acknowledge the stones. They respond to acknowledgement. What does that mean, don't acknowledge the stones? Jake asked. Before anyone could answer, his drone monitor beeped. He'd sent it up for a perimeter survey, standard safety protocol. On the screen, the forest canopy spread out below, Douglas firs thick as a carpet. But there, 2 valleys over, something was moving through the trees. The image was grainy at that distance, but we could see the trees swaying in a line, something large pushing through them. Too large for elk, too steady for wind. The movement had purpose, direction. It was heading toward us. "Bring it back," I ordered. Jake's fingers flew over the controls. The drone banked hard, racing back toward our position. But as it crossed the intervening valley, the image flickered. For just a second, maybe 2, the camera caught something in a small clearing. It was blurry, heat shimmer or movement making details impossible. But the shape was unmistakable. Upright, bipedal, and massive. The drone's altitude reference showed it was flying at 100 feet. The trees in that area averaged 60 feet. Whatever we'd glimpsed stood well clear of them. "Did you see?" Jake started. "We all saw it," I said quietly. The drone made it back, but Jake's hands were shaking so badly he nearly crashed it on landing. We huddled around the monitor, trying to enhance the image, but the quality was too poor. Just a dark, vertical shape that shouldn't exist. That's when I made the decision we should have made earlier. "We're leaving. Tomorrow morning, first light. Tom, can you get the pumps operational enough to certify?" Tom nodded. "I can jury-rig something. Won't last long, but it'll pass inspection." "Do it. Diana, pack up your cameras." Jake, prep the helicopter for earliest possible departure. But even as I gave the orders, I wondered if we'd already stayed too long. The sun was getting low, painting the trees orange and creating long shadows. Whatever was out there, whatever had been watching us, studying us, it would come again tonight. I was right about that. God help us, I was right. Here are the full expanded chapters 5 and 6 from the artifact for you to copy. We worked through the afternoon like people possessed. Tom had his head buried in the log, fuel depot machinery, cursing steadily as he fought 45 years of corrosion and neglect. Diana methodically retrieved and packed her cameras, downloading everything to backup drives with the focus of someone preparing evidence for trial. Jake ran through pre-flight checks on the helicopter 3 times, his nervous energy needing an outlet. I tried to clear enough of the runway for emergency use, hacking at the saplings with a machete we'd brought for this purpose. But my mind kept going back to that logbook entry. "Do not acknowledge the stones." Around 1,400 hours, Tom called me over to the maintenance shed. He'd pulled everything out of the back corner, old fuel filters, rusted tools, mice nests. Behind it all, he'd found more logbooks, some dating back to the 80s. "Joseph, look at this pattern," he said, spreading them out on a workbench. His hands were shaking slightly, though whether from exhaustion or fear I couldn't tell. September 1987. Wildlife problems. Crew evacuated early. September 1991. Equipment vandalized. Unknown cause. September 1996. Team reported rocks thrown at aircraft. Possible juvenile prank. September 2001. Maintenance postponed. Site conditions hostile. Every few years, the same story. And always in September. "It's like a cycle," Tom said quietly. "Like something happens here every fall. Migration pattern, maybe," I suggested. Though even I didn't believe it anymore. "Bears getting ready for winter, territorial about food sources." Tom gave me a long look. "Bears that throw rocks, that stack equipment, boxes by weight." He went silent for a moment, organizing his tools, his tell when processing fear. "Joseph, what if the Forest Service knows? What if that's why they pay triple rate?" Before I could answer, Diana's voice crackled over the radio. "Joseph, you need to see this. Bring Tom." We found her at the tree line, kneeling beside one of her cameras, not the crew ones Jake had installed, but her personal ones she'd placed higher and deeper in the forest. The mounting bracket was bent at an impossible angle. The metal twisted, like someone had grabbed it with massive hands and wrenched it sideways. But that wasn't what she wanted to show us. "Look," she said, pointing to the tree trunk. Strips of bark had been woven across the camera lens. Not randomly, not like an animal scratching or rubbing. The strips were carefully placed, creating a deliberate blind. It would have taken dexterity, planning, tool use. "This is intelligent behavior," Diana said, her voice taking on that clinical tone. "Something understood what the camera was for and disabled it without destroying it. That's problem solving." Jake's voice came over the radio, high and scared. "Guys, get back here, now." We ran back to find Jake at the helicopter, staring at his tablet connected to the drone feed. He'd sent it up for one more perimeter check before we lost the light. 2 valleys over, he said, showing us the screen. Same place as before. This time, the image was clearer. A figure at the edge of a clearing, partially obscured by trees but visible enough. It was standing upright, arms at its sides. The drone's measurement overlay showed the surrounding trees at approximately 60 feet. The figure stood at least 15 feet clear of them. "That's impossible," Tom whispered. "Zoom in," I ordered. Jake's fingers worked the controls. The image pixelated, reformed, pixelated again. But for just a moment, we saw it clearer. Dark, covered in what looked like hair or fur. The proportions were wrong for a human arms too long, torso too thick, and the way it stood, perfectly still, watching the drone. The screen went black. "What happened?" I asked. "I don't know." Jake was frantically working the controls. "Connection just died. It's like a crash in the forest, maybe 200 yards away." The drone had gone down. "Leave it," I said immediately. "We're not going after it." The sun was dropping toward the western ridge, maybe an hour of light left. I made an executive decision. "Everyone in the communications trailer. Now, we're done working. Tom, forget the depot. Diana, leave any cameras you haven't collected. Jake, get the helicopter ready for dawn takeoff, but nobody goes out alone." We sealed ourselves in the comm trailer as the sun set. It was cramped with all 4 of us, but it had metal walls and a locking door. I kept telling myself we were overreacting, that tomorrow we'd laugh about this, that there had to be a rational explanation. Then the smell hit. It came suddenly, like someone had opened a sewage tank directly under our trailer. Wet dog mixed with rotting vegetation, but underneath something worse, something musky and wild and wrong. Diana gagged. Tom covered his face with his shirt. The smell was so strong it seemed to penetrate the sealed trailer, coating everything, making our eyes water. "What is that?" Jake gasped. I knew. Some primitive part of my brain, some ancient instinct inherited from ancestors who lived in caves and feared the dark, it knew exactly what that smell was. It was the smell of something that shouldn't exist, something that had been here long before us, something that wanted us to know it was close. That's when we heard the first pull on the helicopter's tie-down straps. The sound was deliberate, methodical, a steady tension on the strap, testing its strength. Then, release. Then the next strap, like something was learning how we'd secured the aircraft. "Everyone stay calm," I said, though my hand had moved to my sidearm. Old habits from Afghanistan when things went wrong. You defaulted to training. Through the small window, we could see the helicopter 20 meters away, silhouetted in the dying light. The main rotor dipped. Suddenly, something was pulling on it. Hard. "That's 1,000 pounds of lift capacity on those straps," Jake whispered. "Whatever's doing that is..." Another pull, this time violent, enough to rock the helicopter on its skids. Then, nothing. Silence, except for our breathing. The smell was getting worse, if that was possible. It seemed to coat the inside of our nostrils, our throats. Tom had his eyes closed, lips moving in what I realized was probably prayer. Diana was recording everything on her phone, her hands steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. Minutes passed. 5. 10. The sun was completely down now, leaving us in darkness broken only by the LED lantern Jake had switched on. Its white light made everything look worse, somehow too stark, too many shadows. Then came a sound I'll never forget. Footsteps. But wrong. The impact was too heavy, the spacing too wide. They circled our trailer, slow and deliberate. Whatever was walking out there wanted us to hear it. "Joseph." Diana's voice was barely a whisper. She was looking at her phone, at a barometric pressure app she'd been using to track weather. "The pressure's dropping. Fast. That's not meteorologically possible." She was right. Inside the sealed trailer, we all felt it, that sensation in your ears like ascending in an aircraft. My ears popped. Jake's nose started bleeding. The footsteps stopped directly outside our door. I don't know how long we sat there, frozen. Could have been seconds. Could have been an hour. Time did something strange in that trailer, stretched and compressed simultaneously. All I could hear was my heartbeat and the ragged breathing of my crew. Then, very gently, something tried the door handle. The lock held. But the handle turned slowly, all the way one direction, then back. Testing, learning. Tom made a sound, half sob, half prayer. Jake raised his tablet, showing the thermal imaging feed from the helicopter's FLIR system that he'd managed to network to. The entire screen was white. Whatever was outside our door was so hot it was overwhelming the sensors. 3 knocks, polite, almost, like someone requesting entry. Don't acknowledge. It? Diana breathed. The logbook said, don't acknowledge. 3 more knocks. Harder this time. The trailer shook. I knew we had 2 choices. Open the door and face whatever was out there, or stay sealed in and hope it couldn't get through aluminum walls. Neither seemed like good options. That's when we heard the equipment boxes, the sound of heavy plastic being moved, dragged across gravel. Through the window, we could see our supplies, tools, spare parts, medical kit being arranged in the wash of light from the trailer. They were being stacked. Precisely. The heaviest boxes on bottom, graduating to the lightest on top. A perfect pyramid. That's cognitive planning, Diana said, her clinical voice cracking. Weight distribution analysis. It understands physics. The stacking continued for maybe 20 minutes. We watched, paralyzed, as something we couldn't see demonstrated intelligence, patience, problem-solving. When it was done, the pyramid stood about 8 feet tall, perfectly balanced. Then the rocks started hitting the trailer. Not thrown randomly, placed tap, tap, tap along the walls, testing for weak points. The sound moved around us, probing every joint, every seam, looking for a way in. It's going to find the ventilation system, Tom said suddenly. The intake vent on the roof. It's only mesh, and a massive impact on the roof cut him off. The entire trailer bucked. Then another impact, rhythmic, pounding. The aluminum above us began to dent inward with each blow. We need to get to the helicopter, I said. Are you insane? Jake's voice was shrill. It's out there, and in about 30 seconds it's going to be in here. I was right. The roof was failing. Each impact pushed the aluminum down further. Whatever was up there was enormously strong and absolutely determined. On 3, we run. Straight line to the helicopter. Get in, lock the doors, I'll start the engines. We take off immediately, dark or not. Joseph, that's 3. I kicked the door open and ran. The smell hit like a physical force. The darkness was absolute, except for our flashlights cutting wild arcs. Behind me, I heard the others following, heard Diana gasp, heard Jake sobbing as he ran. Something moved to our left, large, fast. But it didn't intercept us. We reached the helicopter. I yanked open the pilot door, dove in, fingers finding the startup sequence by muscle memory alone. The others piled in behind me, Jake slamming into his co-pilot seat, Diana and Tom in the back. Lock the doors, I shouted, hitting the ignition. The turbine began its startup whine. 60 seconds to full power. The longest 60 seconds of my life. That's when we saw it, illuminated in the helicopter's navigation lights. Standing where our trailer had been, which was now crushed like a beer can, was a figure. Massive, easily 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with arms that hung past its knees. It wasn't moving, just watching us with eyes that reflected our lights like a nocturnal animal's. And beside it, partially hidden, something smaller. Similar shape, but perhaps 6 feet tall. Juvenile, I realized, with cold certainty. We'd stumbled into a family group's territory. The engine reached full power. I pulled collective, and we lifted off into the dark. Neither figure moved. They just stood there, watching us leave, until the darkness swallowed them. We didn't make it back to Baker City that night. Flying a helicopter in complete darkness through mountain terrain is suicide, even with night vision equipment, which we didn't have. I managed to get us 12 miles out, to a 4-service helipad I knew from the charts. We spent the rest of the night there, rotors spinning every hour to keep anything from approaching, burning through fuel we couldn't spare. Nobody slept. Nobody talked much either. We all knew what we'd seen, but saying it out loud would have made it real in a way we weren't ready for. At first light, I flew us back to Baker City. We were running on fumes when we touched down, the fuel warning light angry red for the last 10 minutes. My hands were shaking as I shut down the engines. 22 years of flying, and I'd never been that scared in an aircraft. While Tom and Jake refueled, Diana and I huddled in the hangar office with her laptop. She'd been reviewing everything, photos, videos, measurements. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes. But there was something else there too. Excitement, maybe. Or vindication. "I need to send these to someone," she said. "Someone who'll understand what we're looking at." That's how we ended up calling Dr. Sarah Chen at Oregon State University. Diana had found her papers on primate locomotion, biomechanics of bipedalism. If anyone could analyze those tracks objectively, it would be her. The satellite phone connection was terrible, but I'll never forget Dr. Chen's voice when Diana explained what we had. "Send me everything," she said. "No skepticism, no dismissal. Every photo, every measurement. Send it now." It took 40 minutes to upload everything through the satellite link. Diana included her detailed measurements, track length, width, stride, straddle. She'd even calculated the step angles and noted the toe spread patterns. While we waited for Chen to analyze the data, Jake made his own discovery. He'd been going through the camera footage, what little we'd managed to capture, when he found something odd. "Look at this," he said, showing us his tablet. The trail cameras Diana had retrieved before our escape, some had been tampered with. But the tampering itself was the evidence. Bark strips had been woven across the lenses with deliberate precision. Not torn or mashed, but woven, like crude basket work. The mounting brackets were bent at specific angles, not broken, not twisted randomly, but carefully modified to point the cameras away from certain areas. "That's tool use," Diana said quietly. "Problem-solving behavior. It understood what the cameras were for and disabled them without destroying them." Jake zoomed in on one of the bent brackets. The metal showed compression marks, 5 distinct points where something had gripped it. He'd done the calculations based on the metal grade and degree of bend. 800 psi, minimum, he said. That's more than an industrial vice. My satellite phone rang. "Dr. Chen, Mr. Tillman." Her voice was carefully controlled, professional, but I could hear something underneath. "These measurements, I need to be very clear about what I'm seeing, based on the track dimensions and stride length, accounting for the terrain grade and soil compression." She paused. I could hear her breathing. "You're looking at a bipedal subject between 9 and 10 feet tall, mass exceeding 800 pounds. The mid-tarsal break indicates a flexible foot structure unlike modern humans but consistent with early hominid morphology. The stride efficiency suggests adaptation to mountainous terrain over evolutionary timescales." "Is it possible?" I asked. Another pause. "Biomechanically? It shouldn't be. Nothing that large should be able to maintain bipedal locomotion efficiently. But your measurements, they're internally consistent. If this is a hoax, it's the most sophisticated one I've ever seen." "It's not a hoax," I said. "No," she agreed quietly. "I don't think it is. Mr. Tillman, these photos show dermal ridges. Do you understand what that means? Fingerprints. On the feet. That level of detail. You can't fake that." Diana was gesturing frantically at me. She'd pulled up something on her laptop, a map of the Pacific Northwest with dots scattered across it. "Dr. Chen," Diana said, taking the phone. "I've been tracking similar incidents for 3 years. 12 other remote Forest Service sites, all with September encounters, all with official explanations that don't match the evidence. Whatever's at Dutton Creek, it's not isolated. There's a population." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd lost the connection. "Miss Reeves," Dr. Chen finally said, "I'm going to give you a secure email address. Send me everything you have. Everything. And Mr. Tillman, whatever you do, don't go back there. Some discoveries aren't meant to be made public." But even as she said it, I knew we weren't done with Dutton Creek. The Forest Service would want answers. And something told me they already had them. We spent 3 days in Baker City, trying to decide what to do next. The Forest Service kept calling, wanting to know why we'd abandoned the site. I kept stalling, saying we were waiting on equipment, dealing with mechanical issues, but I knew we'd have to go back. We'd left $30,000 of equipment there, and my insurance wouldn't cover abandoned due to unknown bipedal entities. Diana spent those days on her laptop, cross-referencing our experience with her database of similar encounters. The patterns were unsettling. Always remote sites, always September or October, always the same escalation, curiosity, testing, then increasingly aggressive territorial displays. "They're migratory," she said, showing me her charts. moving to lower elevations before winter. Dutton Creek is right in the middle of a natural corridor between the high country and the valleys. Tom, meanwhile, had gone quiet. He'd been raised Buddhist, and I could see him struggling to fit what we'd experienced into his worldview. On the second night, he finally spoke up. "My grandmother used to tell stories," he said, "about the wild men of the mountains. Yeren, she called them. Said they were hungry ghosts, caught between animal and human, unable to find peace in either world. Jake just wanted to forget it all. He'd already started looking for other work, couldn't stop his hands from shaking whenever anyone mentioned going back. But on the morning of September 27th, we didn't have a choice. A Forest Service helicopter landed at Baker City Municipal. Out stepped Bill Hutchinson, a ranger I'd worked with before. 18 years with the service, former Montana state trooper. The kind of guy who'd seen everything and wasn't impressed by any of it, except he looked impressed now. Worried, actually. "Joseph," he said, pulling me aside. "I need your crew to come back with me, just for a few hours. Document the damage, recover your equipment. The service will cover all costs. Bill, what's really going on?" He glanced around, making sure we were alone. "You're the fourth crew to abandon that site since 2017. Fourth crew to report. Unusual circumstances. My bosses want this cleaned up quietly. You know what's up there." It wasn't a question. Bill's jaw tightened, and he positioned himself with his back to the hangar wall, something I'd noticed he always did, like he was making sure nothing could come up behind him. "I've seen them," he said quietly. "Twice, in 17 years. Once at Dutton Creek, once at Marble Point. But officially, I've never seen anything but bears and weather damage." He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a folder marked Personal. Inside were dozens of photos. Tracks like the ones we'd found. Damaged equipment. Trees with bark stripped in patterns. And one blurry image that made my blood run cold. A dark figure at the edge of a clearing. Too tall. Proportions all wrong. "Why doesn't the Forest Service do something?" Diana asked. She'd walked up behind us, Tom and Jake with her. Bill laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do what? Announce that we've got a population of unknown primates in our national forests? The lawsuits alone would shut us down. Environmental groups, indigenous rights, activists, cryptozoology. Nuts. It'd be a circus. So you just let people walk into danger?" "No," Bill said firmly. "We manage it. Remote sites only. September closures when we can justify them. Triple pay to ensure only experienced crews apply. And when something happens," he gestured at us, "we clean it up, pay well for silence, and move on." "We're not signing anything," I said. "You don't have to. Just come back with me, get your equipment, and we all pretend this was weather damage. That's all I'm asking." I looked at my crew. Diana was already nodding. She wanted more evidence. Tom seemed resigned. Jake was shaking his head, but I knew he'd follow my lead. "Fine," I said. "But we're in and out. No overnight, no ground time beyond what's necessary." Bill nodded. "That's all I'm asking." But as we loaded into his helicopter, I saw him check his sidearm, a Glock 20 inches, 10 millimeters, bear country caliber, and I noticed the extra magazines on his belt. He knew exactly what we might find at Dutton Creek, and he was prepared for it not to go quietly. The return to Dutton Creek was worse than I'd imagined. Bill Hutchinson flew us in low and fast, his Forest Service helicopter skimming the treetops. As we approached the airstrip, we could see the damage even from altitude. Our communications trailer was flattened like someone had stepped on a soda can. Equipment scattered everywhere, deep gouges in the earth, where something had dragged heavy objects. "Jesus Christ," Bill muttered, and I noticed his hand move to his sidearm. We circled once before landing. That's when Diana spotted something Bill's official report would never mention, a clear trail leading from the high ground down to our camp, then back up, not a game trail. The undergrowth was pushed down in a way that suggested something walking upright, something that didn't need to go around obstacles but simply pushed through them. Bill set us down near our helicopter, which sat untouched except for the spider-webbed windscreen. While Tom and Jake started loading what equipment we could salvage, Diana and I followed Bill to document the weather damage. That's when we found the bones. Under what had been the windsock frame, arranged in a perfect spiral, were dozens of small bones. Rodents, birds, maybe. But the arrangement was deliberate, mathematical, almost starting from the center and spiraling outward, each bone placed with precision. "That's not natural," Diana whispered, photographing it from every angle. Bill's jaw was tight. "Officially, this is storm scatter. Unofficially." He glanced around, then leaned closer. "They do this. We've found similar arrangements at 4 other sites. Always bones, always spiral patterns. We think it's territorial marking, maybe communication." "Communication?" I asked. "Dr. Chen wasn't the first scientist we've consulted," Bill admitted. Quietly, off the books. "The patterns are consistent. Mathematical progressions. Fibonacci sequences sometimes. It's intelligence, Joseph. Raw, primal maybe, but intelligence." Jake's shout interrupted us. He was standing by the helicopter with his helmet camera, reviewing footage from our work the day before. His face was white. "I was recording when we were checking the runway markers," he said, showing us the playback. "Look at the tree line, 11 feet up. At first, I saw nothing. Then, just for a moment, eye shine. 2 points of reflected light at an impossible height, watching us. The camera's autofocus struggled, blurred, then refocused. The eyes were gone, but something else caught the lens, a hand, massive and dark, gripping a tree trunk. 5 fingers. Opposable thumb. Then nothing. "That's from yesterday afternoon," Jake said. "It was watching us the whole time. Tom had been investigating the fuel depot. He returned with a sample jar, his face grim. The tanks are contaminated. Organic matter, hair, plant material, something else. It would take hours to filter enough fuel for takeoff." Bill checked his watch. "We have maybe 3 hours of daylight. I can fly you out now, leave the equipment." $30,000 of equipment, I reminded him. "Your insurance will cover act of God," Bill said. "That's what this will be filed as." But Diana was shaking her head. "I need my cameras, the evidence." "What evidence?" Bill's voice went hard. "There is no evidence. There was a severe weather event. Equipment was damaged. End of report." That's when Jake, monitoring the helicopter's systems, turned on the FLIR for an evening weather check. The thermal imaging screen lit up immediately. Guys?" His voice cracked. "We've got company. On the ridge, 1,200 meters northwest, was a heat signature. Bipedal, standing perfectly still. The FLIR's measurement system calculated its height based on the surrounding trees, approximately 10 feet. The heat pattern was consistent with a large mammal, but the shape was wrong for any known wildlife. "It's just watching," Bill said quietly. "They do that, as long as we don't." The figure on the screen moved. Not away, but closer. The FLIR tracked it, covering 100 meters in seconds, moving through dense forest that would slow a human to a crawl. Then it stopped again, watching. "Everyone in the helicopter," I ordered. "Now." We loaded what we could. Grabbed Diana's cameras, our personal bags, critical tools. Bill kept watch with his rifle while Tom and Jake secured everything. The figure on the FLIR didn't move again, but I could feel it watching. We all could. As Bill started the engines, Diana was reviewing her camera footage on her phone. "Joseph," she said quietly. "Look at this." She'd captured something in infrared mode. A figure, partially obscured by trees, but clearly bipedal. The proportions were inhuman: arms too long, shoulders too broad. And beside it, smaller but similar, another figure. Juvenile, maybe. "Family group," Diana whispered. "They're protecting territory. That's why September. It's migration season for them too, moving to lower elevations before winter, and we're in their path." The engines reached full power. Bill lifted off, and I watched Dutton Creek fall away below us. For 43 minutes, according to Jake's FLIR logs, that heat signature had stood perfectly still on the ridge, observing us. No human could remain that motionless for that long. No known animal would have the patience. As we cleared the valley, I made a decision. "Bill, I want to see everything. All of it. Every report, every photo, every incident you've documented." He was quiet for a long moment. "That's classified information, Joseph." "Then classify us. Because this is bigger than one maintenance crew getting scared off a mountain." Bill glanced back at me. "You really want to know? Once you know, you can't unknow. You can't go back to normal life pretending these things are just stories." "We already can't," Diana said. Bill nodded slowly. When we land, I'll make some calls. But Joseph, you're not going to like what you learn. The Forest Service has been managing this situation for decades, and management doesn't mean what you think it means. That night at Baker City should have been a relief. We were safe, off the mountain, away from whatever inhabited Dutton Creek. But safety is relative when you've seen something that shouldn't exist. We were in the hangar's break room, waiting for Bill to return from making his calls when it started. 11:47 p.m., according to the security footage we'd review later. The first rock hit the hangar's metal roof like a gunshot. Then another. Then more. A steady bombardment that sent us scrambling away from the windows. Basketball-sized granite chunks, thrown with enough force to dent the steel roofing. How? Jake gasped. We're in town. We're miles from. Another impact, this time against the wall. The whole building shook. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of the parking lot. Nothing. No one. But the rocks kept coming. From 3 distinct directions. Tom was on his phone, trying to call 911, but the call wouldn't connect. The landline was dead too. Diana had her camera out, recording everything. That clinical documentation. Instinct, overriding fear. They followed us, she said, her voice eerily calm. Or they were already here. There's more than one group. I grabbed my sidearm, though I knew it was useless. What was I going to do? Shoot at shadows? The bombardment continued, rhythmic almost, deliberate. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence was worse than the impacts. Bill burst through the door 20 minutes later, his face grim. Pack everything. Now. We're moving you to a federal facility. What's happening? I demanded. They're escalating, he said. And I noticed, he said, they, not it. This has never happened before. Following a crew back to town, attacking a populated area. Something's changed. We loaded into his truck, racing through empty streets. In the side mirror, I thought I saw something in the shadows between buildings, too large, moving wrong. But when I looked directly, nothing. The federal facility turned out to be a Forest Service regional office with reinforced windows and security fencing. Bill led us to a conference room where 3 other people were waiting, all Forest Service, all looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. This is unprecedented. One of them said, a woman who introduced herself as Regional Director Sarah Hoffman. In 40 years of managing these situations, they've never followed anyone back to civilization. Managing, I said. You keep using that word. Hoffman exchanged glances with the others, then nodded at Bill. He pulled out a tablet, connected it to the room's screen. What followed was 40 years of suppressed history. Photos, videos, reports, dozens of encounters, all carefully documented, all officially explained away. The Patterson-Gimlin film? They had the unedited version, showing 3 more figures in the background. Mount St. Helens eruption. The evacuation started because of unusual wildlife behavior. Whole groups moving down the mountain days before the eruption, as if they knew. We've been coexisting for centuries, Hoffman explained. Indigenous peoples knew about them, had protocols for sharing the land. When European settlers arrived, conflicts increased. By the 1,922nd, the Forest Service made a decision: suppress knowledge, manage interactions, prevent escalation. But they're escalating now, Diana pointed out. Yes. Hoffman pulled up a map showing heat signatures from satellite imagery. Population pressure, climate change, habitat loss. They're being pushed into narrower corridors, forced into contact. Dutton Creek is a critical migration route. Every September, family groups move through there. How many? Tom asked quietly. In the Pacific Northwest, we estimate between 200 and 300 individuals, possibly more. The room went silent. I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of the world. The rocks, Jake said suddenly, at the hangar. Why did they stop? Bill and Hoffman exchanged another look. We think it was a warning, or maybe a test. They wanted to see if you'd acknowledge them publicly. When you didn't, when you stayed quiet, they stopped. Don't acknowledge the stones, I muttered, remembering the logbook. Exactly. It's a pattern we've observed. Direct acknowledgement, especially public acknowledgement, triggers aggressive responses. As long as we pretend they don't exist, they tolerate us. Diana had been quiet, reviewing her footage. "This is wrong," she said suddenly. "Hiding this. People have a right to know." "Do they?" Hoffman asked. "What happens when this goes public? Military involvement? Habitat destruction? Species extinction? Or worse, what if they decide coexistence is no longer possible?" Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered. Then the building shook, not from impact, but from something else. Footsteps. Massive, deliberate footsteps, circling the building. Bill checked his phone, looking at exterior security feeds. His face went pale. "They're here. 3 of them. No, 4. On the screen, thermal imaging showed 4 massive figures surrounding the federal building. They weren't attacking, they were just standing, waiting. "What do they want?" Jake whispered. Diana looked at her cameras, then at us. "They want the evidence. They want to stay hidden." The footsteps stopped directly outside our window. Through the reinforced glass, in the darkness, 2 eyes reflected the security lights, watching, waiting. At 3 a.m., they left. No violence, no more rocks. They just melted back into the darkness, leaving only massive footprints in the landscaping and the knowledge that we were being allowed to leave. Hoffman turned to us. "You have a choice. Sign the NDAs, take the payment, and never speak of this. Or don't sign and see how far they're willing to go to protect their secret." Looking at my exhausted crew, I knew what our answer would be, but I also knew the real choice had been made for us the moment we'd landed at Dutton Creek. We were allowed to leave. That's what haunts me most. Not that they existed, but that they chose to let us go. Bill Hutchinson arrived at first light, just as promised. I heard his Forest Service helicopter before I saw it, a distinctive whine that meant either rescue or complications. In our case, it was both. We'd spent the rest of the night huddled in our damaged helicopter, taking shifts on watch, though none of us really slept. The rocks had stopped at 0300, followed by that complete silence. Diana noted no insects, no wind, nothing. Like the entire mountain was holding its breath. Bill landed with practiced precision, barely stirring the debris scattered across our camp. He stepped out with a camera already recording, documenting everything with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before, too many times. "Weather damage," he said loudly, clearly, for the camera. "Looks like we had some unusual microburst activity, maybe a localized wind event." His voice had that official tone, the one cops use when writing tickets they don't believe in. But his eyes told a different story. He was scanning the tree line constantly, hand never far from his sidearm. When he got closer to our helicopter, examining the spider-webbed windscreen, he switched off his body camera. "Joseph," he said quietly, pulling me aside. "Walk with me. Official documentation purposes." We moved away from the others, toward what had been our communications trailer. Up close, the damage was even worse. The aluminum walls showed handprints, massive ones. 5 fingers, opposable thumb, but the size. The palm print alone was nearly a foot wide. "4th crew since 2017, Bill said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Same pattern every time. First night, they test. Second night, they escalate. Third night," he gestured at the destroyed trailer, "they make it clear you're not welcome. You've known all along." He nodded, positioning himself with his back to a large boulder, that habit of his I'd noticed before. 18 years with the Forest Service, seen them twice myself. Once here at Dutton Creek in 2009, once at Marble Point in 2014, both times in September. "What are they?" Bill pulled out his phone, checked that we were still out of earshot of the others, then opened a folder marked Personal. The photos inside made my blood run cold. Tracks like ours, but in snow, showing clear toe articulation. Trees bent at impossible angles. A demolished ranger cabin with the roof peeled back like a tin can. And one image, blurry but unmistakable, a massive figure at the edge of a clearing, proportions all wrong for human or bear. "We don't know what they are," he admitted. Theories range from undiscovered primate to remnant hominid population. The indigenous tribes have stories going back centuries. They called them different names: Stick Indians, Wild Men of the Mountains, Tesemeques. The stories were consistent: large, hairy, intelligent, and territorial. "Why doesn't the Forest Service—" "What would we say?" Bill interrupted, his laugh bitter. "That we've got an unknown species of giant primates in our national forests? The shitstorm would destroy us. Environmental groups demanding protection, cryptozoology, nuts flooding the woods, indigenous rights claims, jurisdictional nightmares with federal agencies. He shook his head. No, we manage it quietly. Remote sites only, September closures when possible. And when something like this happens, you clean it up. We clean it up, he confirmed. Weather damage, equipment failure, wildlife interference. Always something explainable, something that won't trigger questions. Diana had approached while we were talking, her camera in hand, but not recording. I heard what you said. This is wrong. People have a right to know. Bill's expression hardened. Do they? You want to be responsible for what happens next? The military getting involved? Habitat destruction? Some trigger-happy militia thinking they're gonna bag Bigfoot? He pulled up another photo on his phone, a young ranger, face scarred by what looked like claw marks. That's Tommy Reeves. Good ranger. Thought he could make peaceful contact in 2015. They let him live, but the message was clear: stay away. Tom and Jake had joined us now. Jake still clutching his tablet with the FLIR recordings. Bill looked at all of us. Seemed to make a decision. I'm going to show you something, he said. But understand, this doesn't officially exist. He scrolled to a video file, held the phone so we could all see. The footage was grainy, taken from what looked like a game camera. For a moment, nothing. Then, movement. A figure walked past, upright, massive. But it wasn't the size that made us all step back, it was the way it moved. Fluid, purposeful. It paused, looked directly at the camera, and I swear to God it tilted its head like it was considering something. Then it reached out, deliberately, and adjusted the camera angle before walking. That was taken here, Bill said. 2 weeks ago. We came to check the equipment, found the camera moved. Not broken, not destroyed, moved. They wanted us to know they knew what it was. Intelligence, Diana breathed. Intelligence, Bill confirmed. And they're learning. Every encounter, they adapt. They know our patterns, our technology. They know exactly how far they can push before we'd have to acknowledge them officially. He put his phone away, switched his body camera back on. Officially, this was microburst damage. You encountered severe weather that damaged your equipment. The Forest Service will cover your losses, pay your contract in full, plus a bonus for the inconvenience. And unofficially? I asked. Unofficially, you never come back here. You never take contracts for remote September work. And you never, ever, talk publicly about what you saw. He paused, that official voice dropping again. They remember faces, Joseph. They remember threats. And they protect their territory. As we started loading our salvageable equipment, I noticed Bill constantly checking the tree line. Finally, I asked, "Are they watching us now?" He didn't answer directly, just said, "They're always watching. The question is whether they decide you're worth following." That's when Diana made her discovery. "Joseph, you need to see this." Diana was crouched beside a pile of equipment we'd been gathering, her personal trail camera in her hands. Unlike the Forest Service cameras that had been tampered with, this one was intact. She'd hidden it separately, higher and deeper in the forest than the others. "I set this to burst mode with infrared," she explained, scrolling through the camera's memory card on her phone. "Look at the timestamp, 2:47 a.m., right when the perimeter sensors were triggering. The first image was dark, just trees and shadows. The second showed movement a blur at the edge of the frame. But the third..." We all leaned in, even Bill, abandoning his pretense of official documentation. The image showed a figure in profile, perhaps 30 meters from the camera. Despite the infrared grain, details were visible. It stood upright, covered in what appeared to be dark hair or fur. The arms were disproportionately long, hanging well past where human knees would be. The head had a conical shape, sloping back from a heavy brow ridge. "That's not a bear," Jake said unnecessarily, his nervous laugh catching in his throat. "Look at the scale," Diana said, pointing to a tree in the frame. "I measured that tree yesterday. It's a Douglas fir, approximately 60 feet tall, based on the relative positions." She did quick calculations on her phone. The subject is between 9 and 10 feet tall. Bill had gone very still. "Diana, I need you to delete that." "What?" "Delete it. Now. For your own safety. This is evidence. This is a death sentence," Bill said flatly. "You publish that, you make it real. They'll know, and they'll come for you." Diana looked at me, uncertain. But before anyone could speak, she noticed something else in the image. Wait. Enhance here. She zoomed in on the background, to the left of the main figure. There was another one, smaller, perhaps 6 feet tall, partially obscured by vegetation. The proportions were similar but more gracile, possibly a juvenile or female. Family, group, Tom said quietly. That's why they're so territorial. They're protecting young. Bill's radio crackled. Another ranger, checking his position. He responded with practiced calm, then turned back to us. We need to leave. Now. The longer we stay, the more agitated they become. As we loaded the last of our recoverable equipment, Jake was reviewing his tablet one more time. The FLIR recordings from the previous night, trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. He stopped on one frame, face going pale. Guys, look at this. He showed us the thermal imaging from when we'd first detected the massive heat signature on the ridge, but he'd found something we'd missed. In our panic, in the lower corner of the screen, barely visible, were 2 more heat signatures. They'd been flanking us. 3 of them. Jake said. They had us surrounded the whole time. They always do, Bill said quietly. Standard hunting pattern. One visible to hold attention, others positioned for ambush. But here's what should really scare you. They didn't attack. They could have, easily, but they didn't. Why? I asked. Because right now, you're not worth the exposure, but if you become a threat to their secrecy. He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. We lifted off 20 minutes later, Bill's helicopter following ours. As we rose above Dutton Creek, Diana was still photographing, documenting everything. That's when Jake's co-pilot camera captured something that still haunts me. At the tree line, clearly visible in the morning light, stood a figure, 10 feet tall, minimum, covered in dark hair. It didn't hide, didn't run. It just stood there, watching us leave. And beside it, that smaller figure from Diana's photo. But here's what really stayed with me as we cleared the ridge. The larger figure raised one arm. Not threatening, not waving, just acknowledging. Like it was saying, we see you. We know you see us. Now go. Diana downloaded all her files to multiple drives that morning. She showed me her map, later 17 sites across the Pacific Northwest with similar encounters, all following the same pattern. All officially explained away. All in September or October. They're migrating, she said. Following ancient routes, we've built our infrastructure across. Dutton Creek is a bottleneck they have to pass through there to reach winter grounds. So every year, crews like ours stumble into their migration. Most leave after the first warning. Some, like us, push it. A few. She pulled up news articles about missing hikers, unexplained disappearances. A few don't. Leave it all. Bill was right about one thing. The photos, the evidence, it made everything real, in a way that was dangerous. Not just to us, but to them. Diana understood that. She still has all of it, encrypted and hidden, but she's never published, never will. Because the truth is, they allowed us to leave. They could have done so much worse, but they let us go with a warning, and that warning was clear. This is our land. Stay away. The Forest Service keeps scheduling maintenance for Dutton Creek. Crews keep abandoning the site. The official reports blame weather, equipment failure, wildlife. But those of us who've been there, who've seen them, we know the truth. There are places in this world that belong to something else. Something older. Something that watches from the shadows and decides, moment by moment, whether our trespass is worth correcting. We were lucky. They let us leave. Not everyone is that fortunate. Dawn came too slowly. We'd waited through the rest of the night in Bill's helicopter, engines idling, ready to leave at first light. The fuel contamination Tom discovered meant we couldn't just grab our equipment and go. The depot tanks were full of organic matter. Hair, plant fibers, and something else Tom couldn't identify, something that smelled wrong and clogged the filters. 3 hours minimum to flush enough fuel for safe departure, Tom reported, his hands shaking as he worked the pump controls. Maybe 4. We don't have 4 hours, Bill said, constantly scanning the tree line with his binoculars. They're getting agitated. The longer we stay, the worse this gets. Jake had the FLIR system running continuously, tracking heat signatures. They're maintaining a perimeter, he reported, voice tight. 500 meters out. 3. No, 4 of them. Circling. Like wolves, Diana said quietly, still reviewing her photos. Pack hunting behavior. They're not hunting, Bill corrected. They're herding. They want us to leave, but the contaminated fuel is keeping us here. It's almost like a test. I made a command decision then, one that still haunts me. We leave the equipment. All of it. Tom, drain what fuel you can into the portable bladders. 15 minutes, no more. Everyone else, grab only essential gear and Diana's evidence drives. Joseph, that's $30,000 of I don't care. We're leaving. As Tom worked frantically at the fuel depot, Diana and Jake loaded what they could carry. I noticed Diana deliberately leaving some of her cameras behind. Still recording. She saw me watching. For the next crew, she explained, so they'll know what they're walking into. Bill was on his radio, calling in our departure. The official story was already being crafted, unexpected weather system moving in, equipment secured for later retrieval, but his eyes never left the forest, and his hand never left his weapon. Movement, Jake announced. Northeast, closing to 300 meters. Through the FLIR screen, we watched a large heat signature moving through the trees with impossible grace. It would advance 50 meters, stop, hold position for exactly 60 seconds, then advance again. Methodical, deliberate. It's timing us, Diana said. It knows how long fuel transfer takes. Tom was sweating despite the morning chill. 5 more minutes. Just 5 more. A rock landed 20 feet away, not thrown hard, just placed. A warning. Time's up, Bill said. Whatever fuel you have, it has to be enough. We loaded the last bladder as more rocks began falling. Not the violent barrage of 2 nights ago, but steady, measured impacts, herding us toward the helicopters. I saw Tom glance back at the depot, at his half-finished work, and I knew it was killing him to leave a job incomplete. But he climbed aboard without complaint. As Jake ran through his pre-flight checks, Diana grabbed my arm. Joseph, look. On the FLIR screen, all 4 heat signatures had stopped moving. They stood at cardinal points around the airstrip, north, south, east, west, watching, waiting. They're letting us go, Diana breathed. They could stop us, but they're choosing not to. Bill's helicopter lifted off first, hovering to cover our departure. As our rotors spun up, I took one last look around Dutton Creek. Our camp was destroyed, equipment scattered, $30,000 abandoned. But we were alive. That's when Jake's camera caught something extraordinary. Holy shit, he whispered. Are they collecting our stuff? On the screen, 2 heat signatures had moved into our abandoned camp. They weren't destroying anything. They were gathering items, examining them. One picked up Diana's camera, turned it over, set it down carefully. The other was going through Tom's toolkit, removing items one by one. Learning, Diana said. They're learning about us. We lifted off at 0743, rising into morning mist. As we climbed, Jake kept the camera rolling, and that's when we saw the full scope of it. Trails converging on Dutton Creek from every direction, worn into the earth by centuries of use, maybe longer. And at the tree line, clearly visible now in daylight, 3 figures standing motionless, watching our departure. The larger one, 10 feet tall at least, raised one arm. Not a wave, not a threat. An acknowledgement. Then they turned and melted back into the forest. The flight back to Baker City should have been silent. Shell-shocked crew, narrow escape, the usual aftermath of trauma. But Diana couldn't stop talking, her scientific mind processing everything we'd witnessed. The migration patterns, she said. Laptop open on her knees, despite the turbulence. Look, 17 sites, all September encounters, all along this corridor. She traced a line on her map from the Canadian border down through the Cascades. They're following ridge lines, avoiding populated areas. Dutton Creek is a bottleneck, the only pass through this section under 7,000. Jake's camera was still recording, and that turned out to be the most important footage we'd ever capture. As we cleared the ridge, gaining altitude, the morning sun hit the mountains just right, and there, for maybe 3 seconds, the camera caught the network of trails in perfect clarity. Dozens of them, all converging on Dutton Creek like spokes on a wheel. Some following water sources, others keeping to ridge lines. But all of them deliberate, purposeful, ancient. My God, Tom said quietly. How long have they been here? Longer than us, Bill answered over the radio. The tribal elders know. They've always known. But they learned centuries ago you don't talk about them. You don't acknowledge them. You share the land and stay out of their way. I was watching Jake's screen when something else appeared. Just a frame or two, barely visible. Go back, I told him. There, freeze it. In the tree line, maybe a mile from Dutton Creek, partially hidden by morning shadows. Not 3 figures, 9. Different sizes, including what looked like juveniles. A family group, or maybe multiple families, gathered to watch our departure. It's a community, Diana breathed. They have social structure, family units. This isn't just 1 or 2 rogues. It's a population, Bill's voice crackled over the radio. And that's why this stays quiet. Can you imagine? An undiscovered primate species in the Pacific Northwest? The legal battles alone would shut down half the logging industry. Indigenous land claims would explode. Every cryptozoology nut in the world would flood these mountains. And they'd fight back, I said, understanding finally hitting me. The rocks, the intimidation, it's all measured. They know exactly how much force to use to make us leave without triggering a larger response. They've learned, Bill confirmed. Every encounter teaches them more about us, our technology, our patterns, our weaknesses. They're adapting. As Baker City Municipal came into view, Diana was still working on her laptop. Joseph, I've found something. Forest Service records, buried deep. Dutton Creek was supposed to be permanently closed in 1987. Decommissioned, removed from maps. But someone keeps reauthorizing maintenance. Someone keeps sending crews up there. Why? Jake asked. Diana looked up, her face pale. To monitor them. The government knows, Joseph. They've always known. We're not maintenance crews, we're bait. They send us in to see how the creatures react, to track changes in behavior. Bill's helicopter was descending toward the landing pad. He didn't deny Diana's theory. Didn't confirm it either. But his silence said everything. As we touched down, I noticed something else. 2 black SUVs parked near the hangar. Federal plates, waiting for us. Remember, Bill's voice came through one last time. Weather damage, equipment failure, nothing more. But as we shut down the engines, as those SUV doors opened and officials in suits stepped out, I knew we were about to become part of something larger. Part of the cover-up, willing or not. The tall one, a woman with steel gray hair and cold eyes, approached me directly. Mr. Tillman, we need to discuss your experience at Dutton Creek. Weather damage. I started, but she held up a hand. Please, we know what you saw, what you documented. We're here to make you a generous offer. Diana clutched her bag with the drives tighter. Jake's hand moved to his camera. Tom just stared at the ground. We're listening, I said. 2 weeks later, I sat in my Portland office, staring at a check for $150,000. The meeting with the federal officials had been surreal. They knew everything, had satellite footage, thermal imaging, even audio recordings we hadn't known existed. They showed us 40 years of data encounters, mapped and cataloged, behavior patterns analyzed with AI algorithms. We're not asking you to lie. The gray-haired woman, who'd introduced herself only as Director Coleman, had explained. We're asking you to not tell the truth. There's a difference. The offer was simple. Sign revised NDAs, surrender all documentation, accept payment for services rendered to wildlife management. In exchange, we'd never speak publicly about Dutton Creek, never take contracts for remote September work, never investigate further. And if we refuse? Diana had asked. Coleman's smile had been thin. Then you become problems. And problems in matters of national security tend to resolve themselves unfavorably. It wasn't really a choice, but Diana, brilliant Diana, had anticipated this. Before we'd landed, she'd uploaded everything to multiple cloud servers, encrypted and hidden. She'd also mailed a physical drive to a colleague in Japan, another to a contact in Norway. Insurance, she called it. I won't publish, she told Coleman, but I won't destroy it either. Someday, when the world's ready, this needs to be known. Coleman had studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Perhaps. But not today. Tom signed immediately, wanting only to forget. Jake signed after they offered him a position with a government contractor, good pay, steady work, no questions asked. Diana signed, but kept her copies. I held out for 3 days, until Coleman showed me something that changed my mind. It was a video from 1996. A family of hikers at Dutton Creek, unauthorized, off-trail. The footage, recovered from their abandoned equipment, showed what happened when civilians encountered them without warning. I won't describe it. Can't, really. But the message was clear. The current system, flawed as it was, prevented tragedies. We maintain balance, Coleman explained. They stay hidden. We stay away from critical sites. Nobody gets hurt. It's not perfect, but it works. So, I signed. But I also kept flying. Kept taking Forest Service contracts, just never in September, never at remote sites. And sometimes, on clear days when I'm flying over the Cascades, I look down at those mountain ridges and wonder how many eyes are looking back up. Diana still researches, quietly. She's connected with dozens of other witnesses, all with similar stories, all bound by similar agreements. She tells me the pattern is changing, encounters increasing, territories shifting. Climate change, she thinks. Habitat loss. The creatures are being forced into contact whether they want it or not. Jake never talks about it. Moved to California, flies tourists around the bay. But Diana says he still has nightmares. Still wakes up to the sound of rocks hitting metal. Tom went back to Chevron, but he changed. Started attending temple regularly, studying his grandmother's stories about the wild men of the mountains. He says understanding them through a spiritual lens helps. Says maybe they're not monsters or undiscovered primates, but something else entirely, spirits of the forest, guardians of the old world. Me? I still fly. Still take maintenance contracts. But I know now that there are places in this world that belong to something else. Something that watches from the shadows and has learned exactly how much it can reveal without destroying the delicate balance. Every September, I get a call from the Forest Service. Some remote site needs winterization. Triple rate, urgent timeline. I always decline. Because I know what's waiting out there, in those distant mountains. I know what watches from the tree line. And I know that we were lucky they let us leave with a warning. The warning was simple. This is our land. These are our paths. Stay away. Most people who hear this story don't believe it. That's fine. That's probably safer. But if you ever find yourself at a remote Forest Service site in September, and you hear wood knocks in the night, see tracks that don't make sense, smell something wild and wrong on the wind, leave. Don't investigate, don't document, don't acknowledge, just leave, because they're watching. They're always watching, and they've learned exactly how far they can push before we push back. The balance is fragile, the secret is heavy, and some truths are better left in the shadows of the mountains, where they've hidden for centuries, waiting and watching, deciding moment by moment whether our trespass is worth correcting. We were allowed to leave. Remember that. We were allowed to leave.